A memo obtained by TYT Investigates indicates that there have been multiple deaths of detainees in ICE custody that could have been prevented, but were not prevented due to neglect. Now, this was reported by Ken Klippenstein. Please check out the full story because it has some incredible details. He did great work here. Yeah. And what he found was that ICE's Health Service Corps is severely dysfunctional and unfortunately preventable harm and death to detainees has occurred. That's according to the document. This was a memo that was written by an ICE supervisor, and it was given to his higher up, his or her. We don't know the identity of this person. They came forward anonymously. Anyway, the ICE supervisor who was notified about this was Matthew Albence. And apparently Matthew Albence didn't really care too much about the issues that were listed in the memo. The memo obtained by TYT, bearing the subject line urgent matter, details over a dozen cases in which ICE allegedly failed to provide its detainees with proper medical care, including 2 which resulted in fatalities. Now, we've been covering the majority of fatalities that have occurred under the Trump administration, and it seems to be getting worse. Of course, the administration and border protection officials get very defensive. They say that they've done everything right. But again, these documents indicate that that's not the case. And this isn't the first ICE employee who's come forward. There's also Ellen Gallagher, who actually came forward and spoke to NBC about what she witnessed, including detainees being placed in solitary confinement. Take a look.
We have created and continue to support a system that involves widespread abuse of human beings.
ICE's policy states that detainees should be segregated only after careful consideration of alternatives.
Solitary confinement was being used as the first resort, not the last resort. And sometimes it was the only approach.
So we have some specific details of what happened to some of these detainees, but I want to get your thoughts on it.
Well, this is one of those jaw-dropping stories that it's become kind of like ambient noise in a way that we've just kind of accepted it and have gotten used to it. But it's the kind of thing that if you saw this like reported in a foreign country, for example, we'd be like completely outraged and we want to do something about it, But because it's us and because we've just semi-accepted it, it just kind of it feels like it's so dispiriting because you don't feel that there's going to be the kind of reaction that an unbelievable story like this would require. So.
I mean, there have been stories of minors in custody who have been sexually assaulted, who have been victimized. These stories aren't rare, right?
I saw a report that there was in El Paso detention center where they were holding 900 people in a space that should only hold like 125 people. That some of the inmates were climbing up onto the toilet just so that they could get a breath of air, Jesus. Because like it was so crowded in there that they literally couldn't breathe. Like it's I don't know. It's the gulags. It's like all this stuff that we find horrifying in other countries. It's happening right here today, and it's absolutely horrifying.
Well, first of all, congratulations to Ken Klippenstein for getting this story out. One thing that I would say is actually there are 3 detention centers that are mentioned in this piece: Eloy, Stewart Detention Center, and Florence Correctional Center. Those are all private prison operated. Those are all operated by CoreCivic, which is one of the 2 largest private prison companies in America. And what we know is that something like 2/3 of all migrant detainees sleep in beds that are managed by the private prison system. And privatization, I think, is a core part of this story, because when you have this outsourcing to a private contractor, the way they make their money, they lower labor costs, they lower, they cut medical costs, they cut whatever they can to get their layer of profit up. And that, obviously has these tragic consequences. So ICE can't really function without these private companies. And to the extent there has been pushback, it's been from activists who have gone directly after these private corporations for collaborating with ICE.
And these private prisons have been terrible when it comes to US citizens who are detained in their prisons and facilities. And there's no no doubt that they're going to be just as terrible, if not worse, when it comes to undocumented immigrants. I also want to just quickly note that these two major private prison companies, there's Geo Group and Core Civic, they donated a considerable amount of money to Donald Trump because of his rhetoric on immigration. They knew that that was an opportunity to cash in, and as soon as he got elected, their stock value just skyrocketed.
It soared. They hired former aides to Jeff Sessions to lobby for them. They funded the inauguration.
That's right.
At the end of 2016, the government, the Obama administration, was actually pulling out not of immigration facilities, but federal prisons. They were trying to stop privatization of federal prisons. That policy was reversed. So this has been a real priority of the Trump administration to bring the private prison industry out of really a tailspin. And there is great work, I have written about this in these times, great work being done by activists going after not just these private prison companies, but the companies who finance them, the banks.
I love that.
Yes, because the way that these particular companies operate, there is no way for them to continue without consistent financing. They have to buy properties, they have to finance their ongoing operations. And after a hearing with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the Senate or the House Financial Services Committee, JP Morgan said that they would no longer bank with the private prison industry. Wells Fargo has pulled out, US Bank has pulled out. So there is some pressure being put not just on these companies, but on the financial sort of backstory behind these companies.
It's incredible what can get accomplished when you have someone who's fighting for the right things.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, she didn't have to do too much when it came to fighting back against these prisons. But you know, you mentioned the private financing, which of course does happen. But where do they get the majority of their profit from?
Well, of course, it's the federal government.
Right.
In this case, it's ICE. I mean, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's in the billions of dollars what they've received from both ICE and DHS more generally.
Exactly. So I want to just quickly outline a few of the specific cases that Ken Klippenstein put in his piece, because it gives you a sense of just how bad the neglect has been. So for instance, suicide victim Efrain De La Rosa could be saved, the memo says of the victim. The document goes on to state that ICE received a total of 12 significant event notification reports prior to his death depicting suicidal ideation and psychosis. Moreover, De La Rosa was not being treated with psychotropic medication. Instead, he was remanded in segregation or to segregation. De La Rosa's suicide closely mirrors the previous suicide of Joseph Jimenez at Stewart Detention Center. So unfortunately, he did commit suicide, and it could have been prevented. He wasn't given the drugs that he needed. There were warnings, but nothing was done. Another case referenced in the documents involves a detainee identified as a suicide risk, having been prescribed an antihistamine at the Stewart Detention Center, because you know, Benadryl will help you out, right? In yet another case, a detainee was removed from respiratory isolation despite having tuberculosis, potentially putting other detainees at risk for infection.
Another part of this is that when you have a facility run by a core civic, they are not prescribing the medical services. They're subcontracting that out to another company who, and usually it's one of a few companies. Horizon is a big one, and there's another one that the name's escaping me. But so you have contracts upon contracts upon contracts, and that does a couple things. Number one, obviously each layer of profit has to come in on each private company that's doing that. And number two, it really hurts transparency because the subcontracting relationship does not have to be disclosed, because that's not a direct contract with the federal government. So if CCA and Horizon have a relationship with one another, we can't see into that contract and we can't see what's going on. Sometimes we can't get this kind of information unless there's great journalism that actually pulls it out.
Absolutely.
And I think it's worth pointing out, like, you talk about these companies and they sound like cartoon villains, and they largely are. But it's important to understand that it is basically fundamentally impossible for there to be like a good private prison company,
right?
Or like an ethical private prison company, because the profit pressures are so great that if you try to be a good private prison company, imagine if you wanted to start one in your backyard. You would eventually but you would eventually find competition from some other private prison company that's willing to be more evil than you, and then they're going to get all the contracts. So the issue is privatization itself. Like you just cannot tolerate privatizations of things like prisons,
yes,
of things like healthcare,
exactly,
of things like fire departments or police departments or anything like that. Like those are things that are absolutely should be a public responsibility and therefore run by some sort of government.
Yeah, there shouldn't be a profit motive in putting people behind bars, and there is. Yeah. And it's impacted Americans, and it doesn't really seem like anyone really cares. And now it's impacting these migrants, and they're dying as a result of that. And of course, the response to it has been incredibly lame, for lack of a better word.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.